Best part about doing this live is I get to see people coming into the to our space. I see Colleen Keating from Australia, Diane Morrison, Sue O'Reilly, and it just goes on. I'm so happy everybody is here today to be with us on this final day, these 12 days that we have been on a virtual pilgrimage together, which in so many ways is phenomenal. And then, besides the technical issues, it's obviously been a spiritual experience for us, and how that affects us. I hope today will be a day that we can kind of look at taking that energy and bringing it forward into action. And by having action, we could help do things to make the world a better place, because it really needs our energy right now. And one of the reasons why I started on this path was because of the sense of that mystic inside of me that was awakened by Matthew Fox, that unruly mystic that was awakened in me, and realizing that mystic is in all of us. And Hildegard's such a great example of somebody who had that mystical ability to really see, but also to be an administrator and to organize and have that left-right brain. And so I'm hoping that today as our final day, that we're left with that spark. And so what we'll be doing is going from Dr. Shannon's final sermon to hearing Colleen Keating speak. I did a short interview with her. And then we'll see the video that we made last summer in Disibodenberg in search of Hildegard. That'll follow with the live conversation with Matthew Fox, who's joined us. And then we'll do our breakout rooms to share in a virtual Hildegard feast. So once again, thank you so much for being here with me, with us on this. It's just been phenomenal. I woke up this morning just thinking about what the last 12 days were like, and just really appreciate the opportunity to share in this with you.
It's hard to believe. We are on our final day together, the Feast of Saint Hildegard of Bingen. As I mentioned yesterday, and Michael so beautifully stated a moment ago, it has been a great joy for all of us to be on this pilgrimage with you. I also woke up this morning overjoyed for our feast today. As I woke up, I watched the celebration in Bingen of Saint Hildegard at Saint Hildegard's shrine. And while I was lamenting to some degree not being there in person, I realized her spirit extends way beyond, far beyond that physical space. We are as much with her on this Hildegard way as if we were there in person. Hildegard was many things, as we've learned over these last 11 days. She was an artist and a preacher, a musician, a healer, a theologian, a leader, a philosopher, a politician, but first and foremost, she was a nun and a mystic. She was deeply committed to her relationship with Christ, and it manifested in a unique way in her life through the revelation she received through the living light. Hildegard was not a mystic in the sense of one being detached from the world. She was deeply entrenched in this world. She was what we would call a practical mystic. The material world for Hildegard reveals God's creative spirit. God created everything in this world good. Hildegard's theological concept of Viriditas is an indication of her awareness of this divine order. When we become disconnected from our source, in plant language, the vine, we begin to lose our viridity and become dry, not only in the physical sense, but in mind and spirit as well. We are replenished or renewed in greenness when we allow ourselves to be healed, watered, if you will, with God's greening grace. What does it mean to be a practical mystic? It is simply to be awake to the reality of God's presence in every particle of this created world, to recognize the divine within and around us. We foster this awareness through education, prayer, discernment, meditation, creativity, and acts that grow light and love. Today you are invited to bring something to the banquet that captures your own creative spirit, your personal expression of Saint Hildegard's charism. You will have an opportunity, as Michael just mentioned, in our breakout rooms to share what you've brought with your fellow pilgrims. I do invite you during this opening session So feel free to type into the chat message if you'd like to share some of what you've brought. We do ask that you please don't unmute, but you are certainly encouraged throughout this opening to share in the chat with the community what you brought to this banquet. I have brought with me several items, as you can see, possibly you can see in front of me. The first item that I brought are Hildegard's cookies of joy. Many of you have probably made these on various occasions. There is a recipe for them, I noticed, on the Unruly Mystic Facebook page. These cookies have been a staple in Fairport Harbor for almost 10 years, following retreats, liturgies, and sometimes just because. They are called cookies of joy because they contain Hildegard's spices of joy: cinnamon, nutmeg, and clove. I keep this little container with Hildegard's spices of joy in my kitchen pantry for any time I'm feeling the need to add a little Hildegard to my oatmeal, toast, coffee, or anything that calls for cinnamon. At the Green Shepherdess store, which we visited on Sunday, we sell these candles here, made by the Cleveland Candle Company, Saint Hildegard Spice of Joy candles. There are so many creative ways you can take something as simple as Hildegard Spices of Joy and incorporate them into your practice. I did want to read from Physica, a brief passage on where we get the inspiration for these cookies. So in Hildegard's Physica, under nutmeg, it's written the following: nutmeg has great heat and good moderation in its powers. If a person eats nutmeg, it will open up his or her heart, making their judgment free from obstruction, and will give them a good disposition. Take some nutmeg and an equal weight of cinnamon and a bit of cloves, and pulverize them. Then make small cakes with this and fine whole wheat flour and water. You can also use spelt. Eat them often. It will calm all bitterness of the heart and mind, and it will open your heart and impaired senses, and will make your mind cheerful. The second item that I brought with me is fennel tea. These are big vases of fennel. I'm not sure if you can see them or not. Last year, the Western Reserve Herb Society gave me a small handful of fennel seeds, which I planted alongside of the Hildegard house. And this year we had just a beautiful crop of fennel growing. Fennel, also in Physica, Hildegard reminds us, is good for digestion. I have chestnuts with me. Chestnuts, Hildegard says, are good for the brain, which I eat those often. But Hildegard's charism is not only accessible through foods, although she gives us much to work with for a banquet such as this. But there are so many creative expressions that have surfaced from all of you this week. I would like to take a moment to formally thank Reverend Dr. Peter Mihalik, our bell ringer. We've been lovingly calling him Quasimodo all week, for his time with us. Father Mihalik is a retired priest from the Diocese of Cleveland. He has not only served as a pastor here in Fairport Harbor for 26 years, but he earned his doctorate in Rome and served on the faculty at St. Mary's Seminary and Graduate School of Theology in Cleveland for 30 years, teaching patristics, church history, and Latin. I had the pleasure of working on Father Pete's staff for 22 years, and together we discovered St. Hildegard of Bingen. So he would like to share what he brought to the banquet today.
Thank you, Shanna. When the Hildegard Garden opened in 2016 on September 17th, exactly 4 years ago, it started to host some community events as well as religious experiences of retreats and prayer time. And one of those experiences was a painting party. Now, I'm the last person in the world that anyone ever thought would pick up a paintbrush, but I experienced a painting party here in the Hildegarden and went home and bought some paints and brushes and started to paint, and I've been at it ever since. I started to paint and share paintings with people who were grieving at funerals or celebrating at weddings. So I established a kind of ministry of painted prayers. People began to ask for them, and as I pray each day, I try to paint and share the paintings with people who are interested. I painted today, this morning, for the celebration of Saint Hildegard of painting that I just wanted to share with you. It was inspired by all of the talk about Viriditas, and I give thanks to God for this experience, this time to be with you. And as I painted this painting, I prayed for all of you. God bless.
The great German theologian Karl Rahner made the following statement: "The Christian of the future will be a mystic, or will cease to exist at all." I would like to widen that and say the human being of the future will be a mystic or cease to exist at all. Mysticism calls every human person, not just within the Christian tradition. And I imagine Reverend Dr. Matthew Fox will highlight some of this in his presentation today. That as a society, we have in some sense lost the awareness of the sacredness all around us. And I believe Hildegard of Bingen is calling us back to wake us up to this divine order. Living as a practical mystic is a holistic call to find creative and joyful ways to renew Viriditas in our own lives and in the lives of those we encounter. So on this feast day of Saint Hildegard and the final day of our pilgrimage together, may you find yourself immersed in the greening power of God, and may you be fed by God's living light. And so we pray. As we set out on our last journey together, we come to this banquet with grateful hearts. Grateful for all that we have experienced this week, our time on the Hildegard Way in Germany, and the wisdom and knowledge shared with us by so many dedicated Hildegard scholars. We ask that you, God of all veridity, inspire us to be creative in the way we bring light to this world. Keep us safe as we journey along our uncharted paths, and help us to wake up and recognize the synchronicities or the divine signs that you leave for us along the way. Thank you for bringing us together today to celebrate the feast day of your faithful servant, Hildegard of Bingen. May she inspire us to grow and heal in mind, body, and spirit. And we ask all of this in your holy name. Saint Hildegard of Bingen, ora pro nobis. Pray for us. I apologize that I will not be able to join in the rest of the celebration today. We do have a burial, Father Mahalik and I, immediately after we sign off here, for a priest who sincerely loved Saint Hildegard of Bingen. And so we give thanks for all who have in very diverse ways dedicated their lives to Saint Hildegard. On this, we will watch our last video from the Hildegard Way.
I am really happy to introduce to you Colleen Keating, whose inspiration for In Search of Hildegard became one of my filmmaking endeavors while I was in Germany last summer, specifically when we were in Disibodenberg. And we've shared, and we will be sharing, depending upon when you see this video, the short film that we made from her poem. So I'd like to just hand this back over to Colleen to introduce herself and talk about her poem for us.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you. And I'm very happy to be here. I'm enjoying the pilgrimage so much. Well, I'm a poet living in Sydney, Australia. And most of my poetry and writing is in response to nature and hope and social justice issues. My newest book, Hildegard of Bingen, A Poetic Journey, is something that I would just like to show everybody. Hildegard saw the value in creativity. She was a very creative person. I know even her writings are very sort of full of lyrical and metaphorical nuance. She was creative in a way that she was the co-creator and with the great creator, and with that brings divinity into our humanity. So music and singing and drawing mandalas and calligraphy and painting and poetry, especially poetry, and dancing and movement, as we saw the other day with Lauren, with her beautiful story about Ordo Virtutum. This is Hildegard, and this is the creative and healing way that Hildegard teaches us. She was an architect too. The acoustics in the chapel that she built for her singing, for her music and her singing, is sort of something that, for 12th century was pretty great. So how did I know the question everybody likes to ask, how did I get with Hildegard? Well, I was very lucky. There was a Josephite nun in Sydney who went and studied with Matthew Fox and did his at the University of Creation Spirituality and did his course. And she came back and I went to visit her, and she had a book. I've got the book here still. It's been well used because it's 30 years old. She had this book, Illuminations of Hildegard of Bingen, on her coffee table, and I picked it up. Actually, I like to say, seeing as Heather and those have been speaking of synchronicity, I'd like to say the book chose me. The book was saying, pick me, and I had that in my hand. And this Josephite nun said, you should take that and have a lens, you'll enjoy it. Well, I was blown away. it changed me. It was a time, I was 43, about 43, which was the age that Hildegard was when she started to speak. And it seemed to me that it was articulating what I was thinking. My children were leaving home. I was very disillusioned by my beloved Catholic Church that was going to hold on to patriarchy, whatever comes, and holding on to some dogmas they didn't even believe in anymore. And I was disillusioned, and this spoke to me. It articulated exactly what I was wanting to say about this world and this creation-centered world, which I wasn't getting from my church at the time. And as co-creators and God as mother, and God as birther. These were new ideas, and I'd been in the Catholic Church for 43 years and hadn't really received that. And we are blessing. We human beings were blessing, and about balance and healing, and the fiery light. The quotes about when Matthew Fox speaks about the fiery light. I had to get to know more about Hildegard. And Matthew Fox came to Australia too, so I went to his conference there. So I was in love with Hildegard, and my first trip to Bingen, where my poem was set, I was in 1997, and I had this wish to walk in Hildegard's footsteps. So in my sabbatical, I was a high school teacher, and I had this 6 weeks off. That was my dream, to walk in her footsteps. So I caught a flight to Frankfurt, and it's a big thing for an Australian woman to go on a lone pilgrimage from Australia way over to Europe. Not many were doing it at the time. And I caught a flight to Frankfurt and a train to Bingen and a ferry over to Rüdesheim, Bingen there, and then up the hill to the Abbey where I'd booked. And then the next day, with a map and a few instructions, I set off again to Disibodenberg, where the poem is set. And I caught a train to a place called, I wrote it down, Odenheim. And when I got there, it was a little country station, and there was no officer at the station to tell me instructions. So I found someone in the street without any German. I said, ruins, Hildegard ruins. He hardly knew, but he pointed up the hill. He said, oh, there's some ruins up there, in German up there. So I set out, and it was a very hot day. And I think Michael and Heather and Annette will register with that, because you had hot time last year too. It was a very hot day. I was walking up this hill and I was thinking, I'm lost. I don't know what am I doing? And there had been, I didn't tell you this, but there had been a little white butterfly flitting around all the time near me, here, there, and I was watching it every now and again. And I stopped and I was having some water, thinking, where am I going? What am I doing? And this white butterfly, I like to call it might have been a cabbage moth, but it's more romantic and more poetic to call it a white butterfly. It flitted past my eyes and went up, and I looked up at the butterfly. And there were the ruins. I was on the right track. So I arrived there, and it gave me new energy to get going. I arrived there, and I spent the day in Disibodenberg, where we're going. There's on the 17th. There was a peacefulness there that I can't explain. Your footfall sinks into the silence, so you hardly know your body is with you. Now, I've been there in autumn, and it's been crunchy. So it's not always like that, but this day, it was like an out-of-body experience. It's a very holy place. The air is thin. It's like, I know there's a thin line between heaven and earth, as we know when people die. But here you feel this thin line, and it's just the holiness. See, Saint Disibodenberg was there as a hermit in the 7th century. And Hildegard was there for 40 years in the 12th century. So there's something very special about it. So I walked around and found the church and the ruins of the church and the old well and the bakery and a sign to the Kapelle where they think Hildegard lived, adjoining the chapel. And that is where I sat, in another world. And I hope our pilgrimage there today, when you see it, will take you there too. So back home, I wrote the poem. I wrote it in response to a competition called Giving Women a Voice. Giving Women a Voice was a competition, and I wrote the first sort of draft of the poem for that. And it was highly commended in that competition. And I'm so proud that my words and my poetry are going to be part of a pilgrimage. So that's my story, Michael.
That's a good story. Good story. And I've been there. Let's see. I'm trying to think. I've been there. The first time was in the spring, so there was still snow on the ground.
Wow.
And that ended up in the Unruly Mystic Saint Hildegard film. And then just going back and taking Heather there was just a delight. And being able to film, I mean, that was the other part too. I mean, we went there twice. And I don't know about that place because it is a very thin veil place. And I have, in my other documentary, The Unruly Mystic John Muir, I went to a place up in British Columbia, Lake Kitaloop, which is the largest rainforest in North America, and it's the home of the spirit bear, the white bear, that's in the green forest. It has a recessive redhead gene, and getting to this lake was like it was a challenge. You had to take a Zodiac up a river, and then usually nobody could get over into the lake because there wasn't enough water, and we happened to be the only people to be able to do that in like a year or so. But when we got into that lake, I had that same feeling I had at Disibodenberg.
Wow, yes.
And I was just astonished with like thinking of this stream that kind of just goes around the world, and we settle in certain places that can really foster creativity or foster spiritual development. And then there's these other places that we know that are a little more stagnant, maybe a little more conservative. But when you get to these special places like Disibodenberg, it's really special. And I think that with your poem, it really inspired us to just kind of do even more work to capture that sense you had of being there. So,
yeah, and you did capture that, yes. And I'm hoping everybody will feel that too. I know they will, yes.
So,
My third time to go there, I took my partner, my Michael. So, and like you say, taking Heather there was very special. It was very special seeing it through his eyes. And, he was blown away by Disibodenberg too.
yeah, you'd kind of be in trouble if you took your partner there and they're like,
oh yeah,
I'd rather go shopping. Okay, well, thank you for joining us all the way from around the world in Sydney, Australia, and I look forward to seeing you on the rest of the pilgrimage way. So I will end our broadcast with that.
In the land of Hildegard, we are glad to see that more and more pilgrims from all over the world now find their way here. I take a train out of Bingen through the Rhine Valley on this summer's day. Trek up a steep hill, relieved to find an old sign Klosterruine, which points to a verdant track into a cool shady grove. Here, remnants of the 12th century monastery, moss-mottled stone walls mostly buried by vines and embedded tree roots, is Hildegard's world. Standing in this moment, with the outlines of another world, time is shapeless, the divide of centuries a blur. Only my mind's eye can see a spirited young woman and flourishing herb gardens. She prepares salves and tonics, attends the sick, listens to the breeze, and finds God in the hills above her. The earth is our mother, she would sing. Revere and care for her. If we exploit and savage her, she will be out of balance, and the price will be high. Then, silence for 900 years. I lean against the wall mark at Hildegard's cloister. In the lush shade of an almond tree, hanging fruit voluptuous now, is falling to emptiness, the void, the nothingness. How human to fear the waiting for fulfillment to return. Scattered around me are rotten almond fruits, flies enjoying their feast, the decay fodder for the soil. My eyes scan for her presence. A maiden hair fern, grooved into a crumbling niche, catches my eye, delicate and tenacious. I feel a quickening, like a first flutter of new life. Too often the fragile, the intimate whisper, the lightness of touch, the flicker of a sanctuary lamp, like breath are portals and easily missed. I ponder the rise and fall of my breathing, listen to the murmur of heartbeat. Viriditas, murmurs Hildegard. Hildegard is here. I do not flinch, I expect her, nothing like the grey statue at the abbey, holding the orb and feather. Her presence is intimate, light glows luminous, her arms full of herbs from the garden, and her muddy handmade sandals make me laugh.
Well, I hope everybody's feeling a little bit of that Hildegardian light that we've been experiencing all week, and some of that fiery light that Colleen just brought to us and shared with us. And I'd like to bring Matthew Fox to speak with us now, and I am so thankful that he has been part of my life. I think it's been 8 years since I first heard him speak live. I was videotaping him here in Boulder, talking about Via Creativia. He spoke about Hildegard for probably most of that time. And from that, he's been a constant influence and a support in all of my creative projects, including in the new one that we're working on about Albert Einstein. We filmed him last April when we were visiting. So Matthew, I think you're muted at the moment, so I'll just unmute you or ask you to unmute yourself. All right. So welcome to join us on this last day. I think you have a good sense of where we're at, and maybe the first question I would just ask you is, where does the word fiery light appear in Hildegard's work? And where did you first encounter it?
Well, first, let me just say thank you to you, Michael, for your wonderful and trailblazing work all these years on Hildegard and other unruly mystics. And I want to wish happy feast day to all of these fellow travelers of yours. I was wondering if you have a lot of blisters, 12 days on the road, but I guess this is a new version of pilgrimage. And for that imagination, I praise you also. But it's an honor to be with these other lovers and scholars of Hildegard. And I'm very moved by everything that's transpired this morning. And it's really fun to see this priest talk about the cookies, Hildegard cookies and recipes and all that. And then there's this other priest who was a theology professor and so forth, to say that he got into art as meditation or painting late in his life, thanks to Hildegard, and this beautiful story from Australia. So anyway, what you've gathered here, Michael, deserves great praise. And it's very much in the spirit of Hildegard, not only because you're talking about her, but because you're part of a new and a more ancient understanding of what learning and education should be about, that it includes pilgrimages, physical ones as well as online ones. It includes art and creativity. I mean, one thing that amazes me about Hildegard is her first book, and I have this beautiful German edition I've had for years, and they did a marvelous job of reproducing and so forth. But just to realize that just the creativity and the art, and of course, this echoes of the Book of Kells and the whole Celtic tradition, of course, but to realize that when she wrote her first book, it included an opera, it included dozens of paintings and poetry and science and theology. Where has that gone? Our education has been so utterly slimmed down to knowledge, left brain, intellect, and rationality alone, that for this reason alone, Hildegard is a prophet and a turner over of tables, because what she represents in terms of the full soul, the quest for wisdom, not just the quest for knowledge. And so what you're doing here is of that ilk. You're bringing in the poets, you're bringing in your own video, you're bringing in the scholars. And I just want to honor that, because that's why the earth is dying. You know, Thomas Berry says that most of the destruction of the planet today is happening at the hands of people with PhDs. So in other words, a great big left brain without wisdom, without heart, without compassion, without creativity is dangerous. It's a power, it can be a power trip. And so Hildegard, and not just her, but the pre-modern consciousness that she represents, sought wisdom and not just knowledge. And this is what's been lost for hundreds of years in the West. And it's part of patriarchy to banish wisdom. Wisdom is feminine, not only in the Bible, Sophia and Chokmah, but around the world. I have a statue over here of Kuan Yin from the East. So what you're doing is in that tradition of wisdom teaching. And so I just want to honor that. That alone moves me, and it's been part of this hour we've already spent together. And I honor that. We can't do wisdom without art. And Hildegard said that. She said there's wisdom in all creativity. Now, the presence of light, well, you know, the very word illuminations, which is her generic term for her paintings, indicates that she talks often about this experience she had of living light. And that's just a marvelous archetype. For me, it echoes the archetype of the cosmic Christ, which is about the light, John 1, the light in every being. And today's science tells us that there's light waves, photons in every atom in the universe. So the macrocosm of the universe, and of course, Genesis 1 begins with light. But so does today's scientific story of creation, beginning with the fireball. So that light becomes incarnate, it becomes very personal to us. Now, let me say, I'm in Northern California, and we've been through hell the last 3 weeks at least with these fires and the smoke. We have not seen the sun for over 25 days. One scientist has said that breathing in this air today that's around this area in the west of the United States is equivalent to smoking 25 packs of cigarettes. So everything Hildegard warned us about how creation, God will allow creation to punish humanity, is happening in real time. And this is just the wildfires here. Of course, last summer, Australia went through this. And of course, also in southern United States today, there are these recurring floods and hurricanes and the rest. So her creation-centered mysticism could not be more appropriate for our time. But it's not just about experiencing bliss in the light. It's also about experiencing that fire that she talks about. that we arise from dullness, she says. I just love that teaching. Arise from dullness into vigorous justice. Let me get the words exactly. Here it is. I have it in today's meditation, in my daily meditations. Today is dedicated, of course, to Hildegard's feast day. She says, we shall awaken from our dullness and rise vigorously toward justice. So we have to start rising vigorously toward justice, get out of our denial and make-believe worlds we live in, our bubbles. And this means eco-justice and gender justice. And gender justice isn't real unless we're bringing the feminine understanding of learning, which includes wisdom and art and creativity, into all of our educational systems, all of them. And I mean law schools that produce our one-sided judges. And I mean business and economics, all of it has to be penetrated by the divine feminine and by wisdom. Knowledge is not enough. Knowledge is literally destroying the earth, and time is running out. So I just want to honor that. And so this light, the living light that also spoke to her, it awakened her, it spoke to her. But really it speaks to all of us in different ways. Like you talk about your experience at that lake or at Disibodenberg, that the Spirit speaks to us if we're listening. And sometimes it actually talks language. When you were speaking about this Canadian trip, I was reminded of this amazing photographer from Canada. Oh, now I'm going to forget his name. Miles, is it? But he has an amazing story to tell. And, you know, he was not a religious person as such, but one night, it was a moon lit night, full moon, and he went to the window and he was just awed by it, kind of like you were, in a place of tranquility and peace, in the heart of nature. And then he heard this voice, and it told him to go around the world and photograph the sacred sites of the world. This came to me when you talked, because you were talking about these sacred sites that move us. And then he didn't know what to do. He went to a bookstore, and my book on the Cosmic Christ kind of fell out of the bookshelf and hit him in the head. He'd never heard of this. He read it. He said he took that book with him around the world, and he created this beautiful book. I have it in my living room, of the sacred sites of the world. But toward the end of his life, when he couldn't travel and all that, what he did, he created a new book on the pond in his backyard. And he said, the sacred of the world is, you don't have to go to all these sacred sites. I mean, he had all these adventures. Someone stole his photography equipment in China or something like that. I mean, what after? But he said the whole time he felt embraced by this light. He said, what you call the cosmic Christ. This was my experience. So I think that's what Hildegard is talking about. And again, we must deconstruct hagiography. You know, Hildegard is not to be put up on a pedestal. We have to ask that question. Where is it present in our lives? Where is that living light in our lives? Where is that passion for justice and greening in our lives? And there's a real danger of projecting our holiness onto these figures we call saints. That's very corrosive thinking and dangerous, because a real mystic is a prophet also. It's awakening us to what our capacities are about. And we're not going to imitate them. We're going to do it our way. And in our generation, like you're doing it, Michael, with the special gifts of light that we call video and film and now internet. So anyway, that's a long answer to your question. I'm sorry.
That was great. And I really thank you for the acknowledgement. I definitely appreciate that, because you know, you never know, because I'm kind of in my own world right now, doing my own thing, and then having this interaction with everybody else, which wasn't necessarily possible 6 months ago.
That's the fun of being creative, isn't it? You never know. I love that phrase. Yeah, you never know. You don't know if your seeds are going to land on healthy soil or where they're going to go. They may be blown away by the wind. But that's the integrity of it. You do it anyway. It's what Meister Eckhart said. Work for the sake of working. Do justice for the sake of doing justice, not for a reward, not because you do know what the results are going to be. And I think that's just real sound spiritual advice. You get it from Buddhism as well, that we work to work. You do justice to do justice. You make beauty to make beauty. And then the seeds fall where they may. And I think Jesus had the very same experience. That's why he talked about it. Some seeds fall on fertile ground, and some fall on rocks, and some get blown away. But you do it anyway because you have this call. And that's integrity, following the call and doing your best. And look what you've gathered in this circle that you call a pilgrimage. It's just wonderful that so many people are being touched by Hildegard's genius in our time, because she is such a voice for our time.
So one of the questions that was asked to me by one of the pilgrims was, you know, we're focused right now on Hildegard from the Rhineland, and there are other mystics who came out of the Rhineland, and I know you've done other books on them and you've studied them. So I think the question was, why? You know, why was that happening at that time for those people? And then my question to that would be, where's that happening now in the world?
Well, I'll always maintain that the most important influence on the Rhineland mystics is the Celtic tradition. The Celts settled along the Rhine. They settled in northern Italy, so they gave us St. Francis. They even settled in northern Spain and gave us St. Dominic. We know that because Dominic had red hair and a red beard. And so he was part Celtic. So I think we owe a lot of this to the Celts. And the Celts, remember, did not get their theology from St. Augustine, who was the champion of dualism and guilt-ridden for his sexuality as a young man that he never got over. He dumped on the rest of us. The church has absorbed it, unfortunately, for 16 centuries. But the Celts did not go south for their theology. They went to the east. And the East never lost the sense of the cosmic Christ. There is no cosmic Christ in Augustine. He's a psychologist. And he's a genius in his own field, if you will, in his own right. But he leaves out the cosmos. Creation is not important to the dualistic fundamentalists. And of course, Augustine has one great Catholic historian said, a lightning rod for right-wing movements for 1600 years. And that is because fundamentalism is based on dualism, and it's based on fear of the feminine and the yearning to control the feminine. But the Celtic tradition, of course, it was nature-based before Christianity came, but it kept its nature basis and the sense of the cosmic Christ. Never lost it, really, although when the Southern Church, if you will, invaded Council of Whitby and all that in England, it was, you know, they tried to control it. And of course they succeeded. And then Jansenism in the 17th century really cemented a new dualism in the Irish consciousness. But the point is that's what Meister Eckhart, Hildegard of Bingen, Francis of Assisi, Thomas Aquinas, Albert the Great, who all studied along the Rhine and Cologne and so forth. This is what they have in common. I think that Celtic basis, and of course the Celts are related to Hinduism, to India. And so many of the themes you find in Hildegard and Eckhart, for example, about birthing. Birthing is so important to Eckhart. Eckhart says, what does God do all day long? God lies in a maternity bed giving birth. Well, that's something, isn't it? That the universe is a manger. And of course, this is today's science. We now know that there's a new star being born every 15 seconds. How different this is from modern history and science that taught us that the universe is a machine. And so we shut it down. And so we lost Father Sky as an archetype. And men went crazy. And they're still crazy. And because they no longer could connect to something vast and sacred like the sky. And of course, so the point is that many of these great themes we find in Eckhart, for example, and Hildegard too, are derived actually from the Hindu tradition, which is very strong in the themes of birthing, very strong in the themes of art as meditation and creativity. And you know, the great Hindu scholar, Coomaraswamy, through whom I met Meister Eckhart. I didn't get Meister Eckhart from any Dominican teaching. I never heard his name once in 14 years of being trained as a Dominican. Of course, he was condemned. But Coomaraswamy says reading Eckhart is like reading the Upanishads. There are whole sentences in Eckhart, he says, that feel like they were translated from Sanskrit. And it's like reading the Upanishads. Now, Coomaraswamy, by the way, knew 35 languages, but he recognized an Eckhart like that. In his important book written in the 30s on nature and art, he has a whole chapter on Eckhart and says these things. It's just amazing. So what's this? Coomaraswamy, this Hindu, why is he all excited about a Rhineland mystic? Well, because Eckhart ingested the truth of the Holy Spirit, a whole theology of the Holy Spirit as co-creating with us in everything we do. So that's where it comes from. Now, I got into Eckhart, again, not through academia. When I was in Paris studying for my doctorate, the professor, who I loved a lot, history of spirituality, he only spoke briefly about Eckhart, and what he said was strange. He said, Eckhart only has a via negativa. Well, it's true that Eckhart's via negativa is as rich as you can get, the epiphatic divinity. But when I started, when I got into Eckhart is because I read Coomaraswamy. And I had whole sentences from Eckhart in Coomaraswamy's book. I had just written in an article I'd written on sacred space and sacred time, and I couldn't believe it. What's this guy, this Dominican, this ex-Dominican, this, and I are saying the same words? And so that's when I discovered Eckhart. Then I had a car accident, I had an operation, and Eckhart came to me during my operation when I was unconscious. And we were walking together on the beach without saying a word. And it was the most transcendent experience of my life. And I knew that Eckhart and I had a destiny. And that's when I really threw myself into him and was thrilled, because I was writing a book on compassion. And I was getting very depressed that so few Christian theologians through the centuries had written about compassion. They wrote all these books about contemplation, climbing up contemplation, climbing up contemplation. And I found so little on compassion. And then I found Eckhart. He wrote a whole exegesis of Luke 6, be you compassionate as your God in heaven is compassionate, and a whole treatise on the Our Father, which is all about compassion and justice, and all these other sermons on compassion. So that's a little of my story about how I found the Rhineland mystics. And it's Eckhart who led me to Hildegard. It was Eckhart who led me to Hildegard. I kept saying to myself, reading Eckhart, there's a woman in here someplace. There's this feminine energy. Where is this coming from? I knew that Eckhart was indebted to Aquinas, who was alive when Eckhart was alive. He died when Eckhart was about 15. But then I got to Hildegard, and I was thrilled. And the first person, I couldn't find anyone who knew anything about Hildegard. The first person was Tom Berry. The very first time I met him, we went walking together, and I mentioned, I'm working on a book on Hildegard's illuminations. Oh, he said, and then went on and on about Hildegard. He's the only one on the earth that I had met who knew Hildegard and loved her as much as I did. So that was my opening to my pilgrimage with Hildegard, which has been going on for about 45 years.
So just thinking about the idea that there was this energy that connected these people from the Celts, and I'm thinking about back right now in our country, in our world, currently, do you know, and because of what you're doing, can you share with us some other people that are really doing some good work right now?
Well, absolutely. I want to make a special connection to Hildegard and the Rhineland mystics, the creation mystics, to the Native American tradition. Because the very first time I translated Hildegard for class, the very time I shared her with a group in class, I read this poem of hers. I'm the one whose praise echoes on high. I adorn all the earth. I am the breeze that nurtures all things green. I encourage blossoms to flourish with ripening fruits. I'm led by the Spirit to feed the purest streams. I am the rain coming from the dew that causes the grasses to laugh with the joy of life. I call forth tears, the aroma of holy work. I am the yearning for good. I'll never forget what happened. I read that. First time ever that I lectured on Hildegard, and a man spoke up. He said, I've been living on an Indian reservation for 15 years. I'm 26 years old. That lady you just quoted sounds exactly like the medicine man on the res who was my spiritual director the last 10 years. It blew my mind. I said, what? Hildegard, a 12th century German, a Benedictine, sounds like a late 20th century Native American healer? And it just blew my mind wide open. And of course, it's a question I've been carrying then for 45 years. And of course, it's obvious. Pre-modern consciousness of Hildegard, Francis, Aquinas, Mechthild, Eckhart, and Julian Norwich has a lot more in common with Native American wisdom than it does with today's theology, Cardinal Ratzinger, or anyone else, although Pope Francis is trying to get back to it. Because it begins not with the human. That is so modern, to begin with the human, which is to say, to begin with sin. It begins with cosmology, with the universe. Aquinas said, and I quote, the most excellent thing in the universe is not the human, it's the universe. And we're all here to serve that. All beings are. Well, that's Hildegard too. But that's Native American, that's indigenous around the world. So that's my number one answer to you. You want wisdom, go to indigenous peoples. And it's been my blessing and gift to be able to pray in many of their prayers and so on, because Native people have come to me to teach, to my programs, because they find a home in creation spirituality that they don't find elsewhere. So the practices they have, the sweat lodges and the sun dances and the vision quest and all this, you don't want to appropriate it, but if you're invited, or even if you're eager, go out and knock on someone's door and try to get invited, but respect the fact that it is their lineage. But I've been so blessed by that, and that's that's my first answer to you. The wisdom that indigenous people carry. Now, it's not about romanticism. It's not about how things were perfect 500 years ago, but it is about the shadow that's missing in Western thinking, not just theology, but definitely theology, but education, as I talked about earlier. The whole thing leaves out the cosmos, therefore it leaves out the earth. As Thomas Berry says, ecology is functional cosmology. So if you don't have a cosmology, you don't have an ecology. If you don't have an ecology, the whole earth is going to be burning. And the flooding is coming too. As I was with 150 scientists 2 summers ago for a week on climate change, and they said, the hot places are going to get hotter, the dry places are going to get drier, and the wet places are going to get wetter. And that's exactly what's happening. And this is a path we're on. So we need a whole new way of seeing the world. And that is a pre-modern way of putting the cosmos first, putting Mother Earth first. And then how do we fit with all of the other amazing species in what Hildegard marvelously called this web of creation, this sacred web of creation. And believe me, now that we have not had a blue sky for 3 weeks here, we're beginning to fulfill words I spoke years ago. We can no longer take healthy air for granted, healthy water for granted, healthy soil for granted, or the health of other animals and birds for granted, or even the health of our children and grandchildren for granted. But to me, that is what mysticism is, not taking for granted. It's falling into profound gratitude, and the gratitude born of awe and wonder and beauty and the doxa, the glory of creation, the cosmic Christ that is present in all of creation, just what Hildegard talks about, the wisdom of the sparkling of the waters, as she says. This is the Christ. Or if you prefer language like the Buddha nature, that's okay too. Or in Judaism, the image of God. Absolutely parallel understandings of the sacredness built in to all nature, including ourselves.
That's great. So I have one more question to ask you, but I'm also going to put this out to our pilgrims. If you have a question you'd like to ask, just go ahead and send that as a chat message to Heather, or you could do it to the group so everybody can see the same question. That might be a better way to do that. And then she'll moderate that back to me, and then we'll ask that as the final question. But I have one more question to ask you, Matthew. And if you recall, I remember in 2013, we had a new Pope, and the question I asked you, what would Hildegard say to that new Pope? Well, I'm not going to ask you that same question, but in the same vein, what would you say to the current president or the next president? Or what would Hildegard say to the next president or the current president?
Well, I think Hildegard would say what she said to the emperor in her day, and that is to man up and put justice before your own greed and your own agenda. She kept calling popes and emperors back to justice, Lady Justice. I also would invoke, of course, I've just finished a book on Julian of Norwich, and I'm just stunned by her, because she lived through a pandemic, the worst pandemic ever in Europe, the bubonic plague. It was 7 when she hit, and then it kept returning in waves. And she is a direct descendant of Hildegard. That's why I call Hildegard the grandmother of the Rhineland mystic movement. And Julian is in many ways well, followed by Nicholas Acusa, kind of the end of the line. But the unique thing about Julian is she was the only one of these 7 giants who had to live through a pandemic and stay true to creation spirituality. And that's why she's so amazing. I think, and Hildegard, or Julian, more than Hildegard even, although Hildegard began it, develops the theme of God as mother. She deconstructs entirely patriarchy, and she brings in the divine feminine in all her angles on divinity. Christ is mother for her. She develops that. God the Creator is mother as well as father, she says. Spirit is mother, and the whole Trinity together is mother for her. So it's everywhere in her thinking. And non-dualism, she talks so much about sensuality and spirituality, sensuality and substance, and about God in nature. And God is nature, she says. So all this is you see, Hildegard is not standalone. She is a lineage, part of a lineage, but she's this great champion at the launching of the great 12th century Renaissance. But of course, this lineage goes back to Benedict, but also to Jesus. All scholars agree today that Jesus was from the wisdom tradition. And it's in the book of Wisdom that it says, and I quote, "Wisdom is the mother of all goodness." And that really is a metaphysics of Julian of Norwich, who talks about God as the goodness in all things. So this is what we have to get our presidents back to, and our popes and everyone. And Pope Francis in his Laudate Si encyclical does a good job of this. And this is what I mean by original blessing, for which I was condemned by 2 corrupt popes, utterly corrupt. The facts are coming out. But the truth is that original blessing is precisely that. The first page of Genesis, it was a blessing. You know, the first page of the Bible is all about cosmology. But how many schools or seminaries, schools of theology, are studying cosmology today? So this is how the Bible begins, that cosmology, all these things happening, light is first and all that, and it's all good, and then humans come in, and we're very good. Everything together is very good. And Hildegard uses the term original wisdom, and Aquinas uses the term original goodness. I use the term original blessing and got expelled from the Dominican order after 34 years for doing that, etc. So that just shows the intellectual corruption of our time. And of course, those 2 popes for 34 years killed theology in the West. And that's just not my idea. I ran into a professor from my alma mater, the Institute Catholic, years ago when I was doing a dialogue with the scientist Rupert Sheldrake. And she said, this could never happen in Europe today because these popes have killed theology in Europe. So, you know, that's where we're at. But when theology dies, well, spirituality can rise. And I think that's what you're doing, Michael. And I think what these pilgrimages is about, and this is a great interest in spirituality today, including ecumenism, the wisdom of the East meeting the wisdom of the West. And so that's why there are so many sources like Thich Nhat Hanh and the Dalai Lama and great wisdom from the East that is emerging today, and science itself. As I say, there are a lot more scientists today who are mystics than bishops. And I especially appreciate Rupert Sheldrake's work. I mean, there are many scientists, but he has 2 recent books on spiritual practices and science, how science supports meditation and chanting and art and pilgrimages and other practices. I recommend his work very strongly. He and I have done 2 books together, one on angels and one on nature and spirit. But the point is that there are many places to look today, and especially with the help of Google and the rest, where we don't even have to trip off to libraries. So there's a lot of potential, but time is running out on our species. And so your question is so important. I would end with this about your question. Aquinas says, a politician must know more about the human soul than a doctor knows about the human body. I just find that stunning. Absolutely stunning. Hitler knew a lot about the German soul of the 1930s. He knew it was beaten down and wounded and full of resentment, and he tapped into that. I think that the current person in the White House has a similar charism, if you want to call it that. I think that he too has tapped into a big corner in a lot of the American souls after the Great Recession. The people you might see at Main Street who helped bail out Wall Street. Wall Street, of course, is now flourishing again. And Main Street is in many respects still deeply, deeply wounded. So he's tapped into resentment. Now, to me, those are two politicians that are very negative, but Aquinas' principle applies to them. Now, I think if we talk about a great president, like say Abraham Lincoln, or maybe FDR, or maybe you felt that way about JFK, these people tapped into the human soul of America and called forth a greatness, called forth a generosity and a commitment to justice or keeping the Union together and so forth, and taking on slavery. So I think that's at the heart of things. But if you have a leader who only goes for the darkness and the shadow in the human soul, you're in a very precarious situation, which is what we're in today, of course. So that's kind of a bottom line for me when it comes to politicians and leaders, that they need an inner life too. And again, hail to Hildegard, who dared to attack the emperor, whom she had met actually, and the Pope, and tell the Pope, you're surrounded by wicked people and evil is taking over your papacy, do something. And she always returns to the topic of justice. So that's the bottom line. And Aquinas, tremendous, he actually invented the term common good. He brought the term common good from Aristotle 1,500 years earlier into the mainstream of legal thinking in the West. And for that alone, and of course you talk about common good and law, that law is not law if it doesn't serve the common good, and common good and justice. Justice is a test of common good. So he has an incredible, profound understanding of politics and spirituality, like few other people ever. And but he's not been given credit for that because, to be honest, most Thomists have gone off into rabbit holes of scholastic questions that have nothing to do with the lives we live. But Aquinas was amazing in his emphasis on conscience and consciousness. So all these mystics that I think Hildegard inspired. And Aquinas uses the word Viriditas, and he actually footnotes Hildegard on a few occasions, not real often. But there's no question that he knew about Hildegard, and he did make touch with some of her teachings. But she was part of a zeitgeist, a spirit that rose in the 12th century that was the return of the goddess. It was the return of the divine feminine. It gave birth to the whole Gothic movement, which of course was late in her life, but was birthed in her lifetime, such as Chartres Cathedral, and which was a reinvention of everything from education to politics to architecture. And so really her timing was so synchronistic to what was happening. And remember, she called Christ the Green Man. And the Green Man came in on the coattails of the divine feminine, of the goddess in the 12th century. So the Green Man was this amazing architect. At Chartres Cathedral, there are, I think, 165 images of the divine feminine, but there are 42 images of the Green Man. So it's about a 4-to-1 ratio there. But the Green Man was very significant in Hildegard's day. And she applied it directly to Christ. Christ is a green man, she said. And the green man, of course, represents the fertility of all of us, including the male, but also the defense of Mother Earth, that the green man is a warrior defending Mother Earth, and the green woman too. 10% of green men were women. At Norwich Cathedral, in fact, that's where you see a lot of green women on the cathedral there. So these archetypes do not apply to gender explicitly. It is applied to all of us. There's a goddess in every man, and there's a green man in every woman.
I love that.
Like there should be.
That's really nice. Nice way to think about that. I hadn't really thought that way. So let's go and see if there was any question that Heather's picked from our pilgrims. Heather, I don't know if you want to go ahead and ask the question because you're right behind me in the room. Or are you writing it down? You have to probably speak up here.
A few people have mentioned
No, go ahead and just ask the question.
We have a few people that have mentioned a specific book. A Native American woman who wrote it, Braiding Sweetgrass. It's Robin Kimmerer. Have you heard of her?
Oh yes, I have the book right here.
Well, a few people have mentioned that what you're talking really relates to her writings as well. She may be sort of a modern equivalent.
Yes, yeah, I think the indigenous voice is stepping up right now. Just as women are finding their voices, their fifth chakra, so are our indigenous people today. And of course, so are Black people. So a lot of groups that have been sat on, literally, and worse, for centuries, are coming back with their wisdom. And again, a lot of this wisdom, I think, fills the gaps. It represents a shadow that was put down. So again, this is what I love about Julian Norwich, that she develops a whole alternative to patriarchy. And of course, the indigenous view of the world is an alternative to patriarchy because it is an honoring of Mother Earth and the mother dynamics between different species and within the species. So again, it's about a balance. We need a healthy masculine, but we also need the presence of the divine feminine. And, you know, I think it's coming through in many women's writings and in many indigenous sharings today. And this is a sign of hope in our time. The problem being that time is running out and so much of the decision-making control is still in the grip of forces that have been seduced by patriarchy and the dualism that is behind patriarchy. And so this is why someone like Julian especially, but Hildegard too, but I mean, Julian is kind of a culmination of this journey of the creation mystics, that she really gets down to the basics. If we feel there's a war between body and soul, matter and spirit, well, we're not going to solve the problem. And of course, Augustine literally said that. He said the body makes war with the soul. Whereas Eckhart said the body loves the soul. Those aren't the same thing. And Julian carries Eckhart even further and talks about God sits in our sensuality. God loves our sensuality, etc. Now, she was not published for 300 years. And then when she was, it was just a long way to wait, by the way, for your first book review. And then when she was published, hardly anyone read her. But now we're ready for her because she's feminist. She was feminist 700 years before we had the word. And because she offers really a whole picture of what a healthy view of the world is, that does not engage in matricide, because that is what's going on right outside my door here with this discoloring of the sky and everything else. It's matricide. It's a killing of the mother. I had a dream 30 years ago, that birthed my Cosmic Christ book. And the dream said to me, your mother is dying. And I thought about that dream. And I said, my mother wasn't dying. She was alive and healthy. Oh, Mother Earth is dying. Mother Church is dying. The Mother Principle is dying. Compassion is dying. Creativity is dying. The feminine is no longer present in education. Wisdom is dying. Knowledge is everything. Yes, the mother is dying. But now this has come to a culmination that we have a word for today, climate change, or as these young people are calling it, extinction rebellion, to rebel against our own extinction and that of so many other species. So yes, we need all the wisdom we can gather, and the indigenous voices have so much to give. Women voices have so much to give. The mystics, West and East, have so much to give. And men who've done their inner work have plenty to give, because Eckhart was a feminist. And Aquinas was, I call him a proto-feminist, because his whole battle, his whole life was about dualism. He rejected consciously the dualism of Augustine and Plato and chose Aristotle, and he said why? Because Aristotle does not denigrate matter. And he was plummeted for this, pummeled for this. When he died, he was condemned 3 times because of his non-dualism, because of his, quote, consubstantiality of body and soul, the equality of spirit and matter. So he is a real proto-feminist. He's not been given credit for that. But these people stand on his shoulders. There would be no Eckhart without Aquinas. So all this is wonderful resources for our struggle today. It's an inner struggle. We have to do our inner work as well as our outer work. And that means reinventing all our professions, from education to politics to economics to religion to media. This is the task, but we're up for it in the sense that our species must be capable. We wouldn't have come this far, but we've got work to do. And that's where I love David Orr's definition of hope. The eco-philosopher says, hope is a verb with the sleeves rolled up. Hope is a verb with the sleeves rolled up. If we're willing to do the work, the inner work, and the putting it into the outer world, the outer work, like Hildegard did. Someone alluded to that in today's presentations. She wasn't just a mystic in the closet. She was a mystic, you might say, in the world in every way. That's how we all have to be today.
So Matthew, as we wrap up receiving all of your wisdom that you've shared with us, which is so amazing that you're able to maintain all that and just keep putting it out there. I was wondering if you could share a prayer with us to close out this last part of the day, the last hour with you before we move on and do our breakout rooms, because I know a lot of people have a lot of things to say among themselves. But if there was a prayer or something that you could leave us with to reflect upon as we go into those breakout rooms, I think we would appreciate that.
Okay, I'll be glad to. I have a little relics that someone sent me when I was writing one of my books on Hildegard. They told me it was from one of her places or something. I don't know. I hope it wasn't stolen or anything, but I like to believe that it's authentic or in some way. But anyway, I use this as a paperweight. She's with me often. So, Sister Hildegard, our sister to Mother Earth, sister to women everywhere, sister to men, awaken us from our deceitfulness, from our self-pity, from our ignorance, from our narcissism as a species. Awaken us from this deadening that modern consciousness has locked us into. Awaken us to a vigor for justice, for eco-justice, for gender justice, for racial justice, for justice with all the other animals and critters that we share the planet with. The rivers and the oceans, the trees and the soil, clouds, the air. Maybe reinvent the way we live on this planet, our species, so that it might flourish, that it might be green, full of Viriditas, full of the Holy Spirit. Be with us, Hildegard. We need your strength and your wisdom and your passion. Amen.
Just wanted to sit with that for a moment for all of us.